Welcome to Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time, where we aim to break down barriers, demystify blindness, and promote real and lasting change. Join host David Steinmetz as he connects us with professionals who are making a positive impact in the community. These leaders help empower individuals who are blind or have other disabilities to live a full and inclusive life. Let's lean in as David kicks off today's conversation.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, David Steinmetz. I'd like to take just a brief moment just to thank a few people. First and foremost, I'd like to thank my family for always supporting me and always challenging me and not letting me settle. I also like to thank Phoenix Business RadioX, this beautiful studio where we are recording today, for hosting me, as well as my good friend, Kara Nowicki, a mentor, a coach, and just a great supporter of the things that I'm doing. So sitting across the table today, as well as my producer. So thank you, Karen. I also like to thank Arizona Industries for the Blind, my sponsor for today's show, for allowing me this opportunity to get my story and message about advocating for people who are blind, vision impaired, and people with disabilities in the community to live a full and inclusive life. So the show really came about from just my past experiences, whether I'm jumping into a rideshare vehicle or a networking event. And typically, the first conversation starts off as, "What's your dog's name?" Second question typically is usually, sorry, very nervous for my first show. So the second question is always, have you been blind your entire life? And then finally, the question is, how do people who are blind do, and then fill in the blank? So it is my goal for this show really to demystify blindness, break down barriers, and to kind of normalize what blindness is so that when you're out in the community, you're a business leader, or you are a hiring manager, you are more aware and comfortable and understand the needs and desires of people who are blind, visually impaired. I am very fortunate today to have a group of self-proclaimed nerds from Nerdery. Nerdery is a digital consulting firm united around the vision of relentlessly creating a world that works for all. So I'd like to introduce my guest today, and I'll start off with Brandon Ramsey. He is the Senior Customer Engagement Manager at Nerdery. Brandon?
Yeah, this is so cool. This is your first one, and thank you so much for allowing us to be this inaugural kickoff to this amazing podcast that you have launched. So pleasure to be here. Senior Customer Engagement Manager, spent 4 years in the nonprofit area working for people with disabilities. So David and I had a chance to connect way back in my Microsoft days, and we've stayed connected. He knows how passionate I am to provide opportunities to break down these barriers. So excited to be here. So thanks, David.
Thank you, Brandon. Glad to have you, and appreciate your friendship. Next, I have Rus Ahrens. Would you like to introduce yourself, please, Rus?
Yeah, excited to be here. My name is Rus Ahrens. I'm a senior user experience designer at Nerdery. And since the day that I first discovered that human-centered design was a thing, I feel like I've been on the path towards accessibility, and really excited to talk about accessibility and how for someone like myself who designs software for people, that really just expands the definition of usability and makes the web a better place for folks with disabilities, but really for everyone.
Thank you, Rus. And finally, we have Dan Holbrook. Dan, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dan Holbrook. I'm the Principal Quality Engineer and Accessibility Domain Lead at Nerdery. Well, one of the Principal Quality Engineers, and I've been testing websites for 15 years, and I've been testing the accessibility of software, mobile apps, and websites specifically for about 6 years at Nerdery.
Thank you very much, Dan, for your introduction. I'm really excited for today's show, really for many reasons, but talking about digital accessibility, right? It's not just how someone engages with the website, but there's so many other areas, whether it's from the consumer side or even from the employee of an employer side and how their staff engage with technology. And I find for myself, using a smartphone and navigating through whether it's a website or an app to book a ride or whatever it happens to be is, where do they put those buttons? Are they usable? Are they in a place where you're trying to hit a send button and there's also another button that activates something else right there too. So digital accessibility really impacts all of our lives now. And so I'm really excited for this conversation today. Maybe Russ, if you wouldn't mind, let's talk a little bit about what do employers miss in the accessibility space, and maybe you could kick that off, and anybody else want to contribute?
Yeah, I would start by saying I feel like these days it's more and more rare to find companies and organizations that aren't aware that their website needs to be accessible. But what you will find is that companies aren't always extending that need for accessibility to things like maybe like a job portal, right? If they have a career site or something like that, sometimes those aren't accessible, or maybe they're using a third-party tool for their job postings that isn't accessible, or even other internal tools like CRM, customer. Brandon, you know this one. What's the R in CRM?
Customer relationship.
There you go. Yep. Customer
ask the salesperson. I got you.
Yep. Things like that, right? Your internal tools that your staff are using every day. If those aren't accessible, or maybe they're technically accessible, following the guidelines, but not usable for people with disabilities, that can be a real problem for folks coming into your organization with disabilities.
Sure.
And Dave, if you don't mind, I'll chime in too. From my role and my perspective is when I'm out there talking to customers from the enterprise to the commercial space, it's really advocating and driving that awareness for them to even think about these different aspects. So I learn a lot from Russ and Dan and what they've done within the Accessibility Action Squad. So for me, it's also driving that awareness, because in a lot of our scenarios, we might not think about those different areas. And so knowing what I know from my team here at Nerdery, I'm able to really advocate that on behalf of us and people with disabilities for that resource. So when I look at certain things, like, Russ was talking about the job portal, a lot of times we don't really think about certain things, especially if we're using third parties. So from my perspective and being out there and talking to potential employers, it's really me presenting that awareness, because I think that's where it all starts, is just for them to be aware.
And that comes into play too when we're estimating accessibility for a project. We'll set our little quality assurance robots out to the site to kind of collect all the URLs. And then oftentimes we'll come back to the salesperson, the product manager, and be like, okay, you told us we're testing www.nerdery.com, but what about shop.nerdery.com? What about careers.nerdery.com? Like all these other little nooks and crannies that you might not be thinking about and kind of might be missing.
Yep, I've used Dan several times on that. I've asked him so can you give me a once over and see where there might be an opportunity for us to help out?
Yeah. It's something we see again and again, is that third-party tools that maybe our clients are integrating with, they will say in their marketing materials that they're fully accessible, but when you dig into that, that's not always the case. And so there's a need to kind of do your own due diligence in terms of accessibility when bringing a third-party tool into your ecosystem.
And there's a lot of trust there. Like, I mean, certainly on the accessibility side, we might think of, accessibility overlays have been in the news for, being problematic and not, causing maybe more harm than good potentially. But people don't think about like, well, I'm adding YouTube to the site or Twitter or Google, like, and you kind of trust that that's just going to inherently solve all the problems. I think David, in one of our prior conversations, we talked about, we had one website where they just embedded a Twitter feed in the middle of the website. So someone using keyboard navigation had to tab through hundreds of elements to get past that kind of Twitter embed in the middle of their website. So you kind of, you might assume good faith, or I mean, maybe it's good faith, but you might assume compliance or accessibility on behalf of a larger organization or a well-known third-party integration that really doesn't have it.
Sure. Great point. So for an employer, an organization, how do they typically start the process and start including accessibility and without making it a burden or adding a lot of cost to that, right? Because that's where organizations are going to say, how can we meet compliance minimum standards without fully engaging in making that true assessment. So what would be some of the things that an employer can or should do?
Well, so we often talk about the 110-100 model. Take something that takes 1 hour to fix when it's in someone's head versus 10 hours to fix when it's built, but not deployed to production. And then maybe it takes 100 hours to fix, down the road when it's out. And that 1 hour really starts with Rus's team and kind of inside Rus's head on the design side, which I'm sure you can speak to.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And that what that means in practice is when I'm working on a design, before I'm even handing that design off to the developers to be developed, I'm sitting down with my developers and also with someone like Dan to take a look at it from from a lot of different perspectives. But accessibility's always got to be in there because, to Dan's point, if we're finding the accessibility bug when I've just, made some pictures with my design software, that's an easy fix. If we're finding it once the developers have written a lot of code or it's already out in the world, that becomes a much tougher fix at that point. Because designs are relatively easy to change. Code is harder. Something that people are already using, harder still.
Mm-hmm. And David, I'll pick up too, is because since I'm kind of the initial engagement with some of these clients, it's bringing that up ahead of time. So we have the perception where accessibility is expensive, which that's not true. It's expensive to go back and fix everything that isn't done ahead of time. So one of the things when we talk about employers and their journey down accessibility, digital accessibility, it really starts with the initial conversation, better understanding what they're trying to get to, what's their strategy, what are they trying to accomplish? And then that's when we start working and looking at the design aspects and looking at some of those other aspects. So when we look at digital accessibility, it really needs to start at the very front end of that conversation. So what are we trying to build? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to design? And accessibility needs to be part of that conversation as a key feature and element of building digital products.
And Brandon and I, I'm sure we've both seen a lot of companies come in where he brings up accessibility, and some companies think it's expensive. Other companies think that everyone's already making everything accessible. Like they think there's no issues out there, and they're getting accessibility for free. So kind of making sure that they're mindful of, you really have to bake that into your process and think about it during your process, because it doesn't just happen. David, I'm sure you've been to many in an accessible website in your day. So
yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Having that thought up front, and Nerdery is really kind of taking a lead and building, kind of this like the action squad, right? The usability action squad. Rus, would you like to maybe tell us a little bit more about what that is and maybe help other organizations understand the role of that team and how they can best help either Nerdery help or kicking this off internally?
Yeah. So the Action Squad, the history of the Action Squad is Nerdery for a long time now has had a really strong accessibility QA team. We've had a lot of nerds at Nerdery who are really passionate about accessibility, including on the QA team, but then also developers and designers. But we've all kind of been working in silos to a greater or lesser degree, right? Like the QA team might have a QA initiative to improve accessibility. The developers might be working on their own accessibility initiatives. Design, same story. And what we found was that if we really want to make change at a larger scale in our organization and be able to maximize our impact for our clients, we needed to bring all those people together into the same room. And so that was an exercise in looking for kind of who are those leaders who are already leading in accessibility, who are already passionate about accessibility. Two of them are right here, right? Dan's been pushing Nerdery's accessibility practice ahead for years now. Brandon's been making amazing connections like this one, right? To have a chance to be on the radio talking about accessibility. And there are others. I was, as the person who kind of kicked off this process, I was just amazed at how easy it was, honestly, to collect a group of passionate people from every discipline. There were some where even sales, I didn't know Brandon that well before this kicked off, and it was, I had, from interacting with salespeople, I hadn't understood that there are salespeople who are deeply passionate at Nerdery about accessibility, and making those connections is starting to kind of multiply our impact rather than just having those individual efforts going on.
Yeah,
go ahead,
man. I was just gonna say, yeah, I was pumped. We here at Nerdery, we have this thing called "Don't Be a Stranger," and it allows you to kind of meet people from all different disciplines, and we get to learn about each other and kind of go from there. And Dan, I think it might have been you that pinged me and said, "Hey, I have this group. Do you want to join it?" And I was like, "Oh, this is awesome!" So it was all from that, and so it was very organic on how it happened, and people started kind of resonating to that, and so I was so pumped to be part of this group and this passionate group led by Dan and Rus, and from the resources that they are sharing to our collaboration to breaking down those silos to really show a unified direction and mission on not just meeting the basic standards of accessibility, but really taking it in a thoughtful manner to be proactive. And so, Rus, Dan, I'm just going to throw this out here. I appreciate so much that you've created this internally, and I get to read all of your threads, which blow my mind. So, David, it's nice to join an organization and two passionate individuals that can really kind of grow a group leading by passion. So I'm pumped to be part of this group.
And I think it's important to, like, if you're thinking about copy pasting this over to your own organization, but like we've had so many, like initiatives and things that were failing in the past. QA had accessibility that wasn't really getting much of anywhere for a couple of years. And it came down to kind of bringing these people together across silos, giving them a mandate, like letting them make changes and proposals that might be listened to, and kind of getting them to those discussions so that you're kind of tying together the people on the implementation side, the people on the sales side, people on the marketing side, and everyone's kind of saying the same thing. Because you might have, we want an accessibility action squad. We don't want an accessibility club.
Right. So true. And I love the way that you just stated that, because it's important to be able to take all those experiences, the shared experiences, the knowledge, and bring all those together so that everybody's providing insight, just like in this conversation where we're hearing, Rus contributing one piece and Brandon and Dan something else, but they're all focused on in the same area with the same end goal of that accessibility in the product to your client. So it's great to be able to share and bring those experiences together for basically a common good.
And for action, Dan, I love that Dan was all about action. We can talk all day about what we can do, but then it's really kind of taking action on it. And so I know Dan's been really championing on, like, great, it's a great idea. Let's put it in motion. So if there are other organizations that are thinking about it in this way, really put together an action plan on how you're going to execute these ideas or discussions that are coming out of these groups.
And it can really be baby steps. Like, I think the very first thing we did was talk to Rus's team and say, like, people with vision problems, or even, people who are using, their phones in the sunlight or something like that. We all need good contrast on websites. So we said, let's make sure that there's good color contrast, and then also, good alt text on images, making sure that those basics were covered, so that all the content was just initially there for people, at least. And that was something we did years and years ago that we kind of have tried to do across all projects now. And it was just, it wasn't like, here's 15 things. It was, here's one thing we can do now, and let's talk about the next thing next quarter, et cetera, et cetera. Keep it rolling.
Right. And if you want to talk about kind of that bias for action and making sure that you can back that up, I think there's two really big things that I would want to talk about there that I think have really impacted our effectiveness. One is having an executive sponsor. And so in our case, Megan Styling, who's our chief technology officer, she's our executive sponsor. And in meeting with her regularly, she's able to say like, well, someone's already doing something connected to what you're doing in the organization. How can we put these things together and have a bigger impact? Or the organization is trying to drive towards this. How can we kind of bring these two things together to move, both goals forward? And so that really helps. And then the second thing is in recruiting that team, you're looking for people that have some experience, have been around the organization for a little bit, so they know how to get things done, and who share that bias for action, right? Because the last thing you want to do is recruit a group that, for whatever combination of reasons, can't have that impact that you're trying to have. It's not that, people lack passion or anything like that. There's tons of passionate people, but you need people that can get things done. And that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. During the conversation, we were talking about looking at accessibility and having those conversations either with an employer or client or internally. And you mentioned, some of the basics if you're developing an application for someone who is blind, visually impaired, or when you're developing that application, does it have to be really difficult, or is it difficult to put in those tools, as you mentioned, alt text, right, that describes in the background to someone who's blind, visually impaired, who's using a screen reader, is reading what that image is, right? Two people standing in a park, whatever it happens to be. Is that difficult for organizations? And let's talk about some of the tools that maybe help make a site that's accessible.
Sure. I think again, especially if you're thinking about it on the design side, it doesn't have to be difficult. There's kind of the ARIA code that people use, ARIA, to add accessibility to features that are not accessible. But you get a lot of accessibility automatically if you're using kind of native features. If instead of building a button out of some other element, you're using the native HTML like button element. So if you start with the basics, you get a lot of accessibility. Of course, we are like a high-level consultancy, so our clients don't want the basics. So we are dealing with like kind of fancy features, unique implementations, things that challenge our devs, but a lot of them kind of go to that challenge. And then what we say there is there's automated tools you can use on the development side while you're building something, and that'll kind of check your code in the same way you're checking your code for other things. Like that'll say like, oh, you're using this ARIA stuff wrong, or there should be a label on this element. And that usually catches maybe 20% of the issues before they get to us. And generally, like devs who get used to working with those tools are going to be churning out better code. And a lot of our developers encounter accessibility for the first time when they're put on a project with me or one of my team, and they get 15 tickets back. But a lot of them rise to the challenge and learn it. And you really only have to learn how to make an accessible form once or an accessible button once, and you can do that again and again and again and again. So it's kind of about learning the tools that you're using the tools at your disposal, like as far left as we can, starting at Rus, and then on the development side, kind of analyzing your own code. We've got a handout we share at the Nerdery called like just quick accessibility tests. And there's another, and then I made a sequel called accessibility tests with a screen reader that you can do quickly. And just we asked the devs to do those, couple minutes of checking on an accessibility project to make sure that you can do this at home. If you're interested in a site's accessibility, one of the most basic tests is just load up a website and tab through it, press tab in Chrome or Firefox or whatever, and kind of look to see where your cursor goes. And if your cursor is actually going all the places you think it should be. There's kind of very easy checks that people do before they even get to me that kind of streamline this process and make it easier.
I would add to that it doesn't have to be a difficult process, but there is a baseline of knowledge that's necessary, right? And so if you're looking to make a website accessible, or maybe not a website, right? Maybe a mobile app or an internal tool, whatever it is, I think it comes down to either building that knowledge internally or hiring a third party that can help you with don't overestimate the effort, but also like don't underestimate kind of the baseline of both knowledge and process that's needed in order to make it happen.
Yeah, and don't spend 3 hours trying to learn it all yourself when there's resources. There's lots of great resources out there. I've sent a lot of devs over to the examples at like webaim.org, for example. Like, hey, look, here's how they build a table and a form and a button, and kind of you can check how things should work against this site when you're building your own stuff. Even if you're not building it the exact same way, you should be getting the same results. And there's design pattern libraries. We offer training. Obviously, a lot of people need it out there. So there's lots of resources. So don't fumble around the dark. Kind of try to give people the information they need.
Yeah, and I'll kind of chime in too. Is we're also always open to help and offer some consultations with customers. And so at any point in time, if there is somebody out there that is looking to explore this or needing help, our team is always open to be able to have that dialogue. So I know that with Dan and Rus here, and we have a bigger team, we want to be those strong advocates. So, whether it's a paid engagement or it's just us offering our expertise because it's the right thing to do, that's kind of where we're at right now. So where we are and how we can help is kind of our best bet right now.
Great. Thank you for adding that in there, Brandon. I appreciate that. Nowadays, there's, one in four people have identified as having a disability. It's not just, blindness or physical. There's other hidden disabilities and things like that. There's also a lot of costs associated in regards to accessibility, not just from building it, but also maybe that missed revenue from the consumer side, right? The consumer disabled community has a lot of buying power. So, Dan, would you mind, or I'll open up to anybody about having some conversations about maybe some of the costs that are associated either to develop or even just in the missed opportunities?
Sure. I mean, obviously there's lawsuits. Lawsuits have been rising, and we don't like to come to our clients with the the stick. We want to tell them how great accessibility is. And you talk about market. That's kind of the perfect place to start thinking about this. I often kind of shock people. I'm like, okay, we're talking about 22-25% of Americans are declaring some sort of disability. You're having us test on the Edge browser. Right now, about 5 to 6% of Americans use the Edge browser. 3 to 4% of them use Firefox. These are things that you are baking into the process automatically that you think we definitely need to support, but there's this much larger group that you're not supporting. So there's tons of costs there. Also, like something Rus has heard and said over the years many times, but accessibility is for everyone. Like when we're talking accessibility, there's just a spectrum of where I spend most of my time in accessibility compliance, like the testing sites for legal compliance, to Rus spends more of his time on usability of sites, like what's the better experience for people. And when you do something that makes the site, a great example is for low vision users, like just bumping the fonts up a little bit. That's going to make it easier to read for everyone. It's not just low vision users who are going to see those bigger fonts. A lot of us are on our phones these days. So the other example we often use is all this contrast stuff we keep talking about. Like, have you ever tried to look at your phone at a ball game, or you're out at the grocery store or something like that, somewhere with bad lighting? You really get some benefits there that you're not even thinking of. And a lot of the times I'll write an accessibility ticket and it'll maybe sit around for a while, and the client will do some, client feedback studies, and they'll be like, oh, they said it was hard to use this form. I'm like, yes, I know. Here's some kind of definitive testing showing you that it's hard to use this form because there's some disabled users who can't even use it at all. So Rus, I think you were going to jump in there.
Oh yeah, another example I love to use for this is captioning and transcripts, right? Like people often think of, or for a while, I think people would think of captions as that's for someone who's hearing impaired. But how many of us have used captions because we're in a place where it would be rude to have our sound on and we didn't bring a pair of headphones, or those types of things, or maybe it's a noisy environment we couldn't hear even if we were to turn our sound all the way up. And so captions, I think, and transcripts too, right? Transcripts are something that we think of as, an alternative for someone who's accessing the, audio visual content with an assistive technology, like, if they're coming with a screen reader or something like that. But those transcripts are also there for SEO, right? If you're trying to improve your SEO, the web crawlers can't watch a video, so they're looking for the text of that transcript in order to access the content of the video.
Yeah, and someone who's using, headings to navigate a page in a screen reader, for example, like we want those headings to be, descriptive and useful for those users. Again, you're talking about the readability of the page is increased, and then potentially SEO. There's definitely some tension in the accessibility space of talking about like, well, you're going to get all this money for marketing and SEO, like if you get accessibility, but like it's true. Like we run at the Nerdery, we run Lighthouse accessibility, performance SEO tests, and we see those SEO numbers go up when we make the accessibility fixes. Like so there is a correlation there. It's maybe not the reason we would want everyone to do accessibility, but like you're getting a lot of other things out of accessibility.
Yeah, and it's how many times do you get on a website or a mobile app or accessing it, and you have issues with it and you never want to go back there, you get frustrated. And just turned 40, so I know I don't resemble a 40-year-old, but it was one of the first things where, my eyes, I started needing reading glasses, and I started kind of navigating some of the web tools and pointing out some things that were issues where I'm like, oh, this website, I can't navigate it. The text is so little, I don't want to come back to the website. So, we talk about from a business case, if you're using your website or you're using your application to really drive customer loyalty or drive new customers, and it's a horrible experience, or it's just, you're missing out on a huge market. And so when we think about, missing out on potential market or customers or whatever it is, really think about that overall experience. And so are you tailoring your experience to one or all? And what does that look like? And so since joining the Nerdery, there's been plenty of times where I'm like, oh, I wish this was this way, or they should do it this way, or they should do it this way. And, sometimes I'm out and I don't have my reading glasses and I'm on my phone and I can't access something. But that's all to think when you take into consideration where it's not necessarily building it for a specific audience, you're building it for the broader audience and taking that approach. So, and I know we've all experienced it. We've all said, oh, this website needs this or whatever. But it's focused on just like we said, building products for all and taking that into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. I totally agree with you. Just over the weekend, I was looking to sell an item, and I was going to one of the sites to put that up there, and I couldn't navigate it. Buttons have funky names, and somewhere embedded in that description of it was inbox or post or whatever it is. But to be able to try and do that task on my own was nearly impossible. So I left that site and went somewhere else. And so the cost to the application, or those that are driving revenue through the different media ways of driving that revenue, and you're losing one on just one, how many other people are sharing that same experience? And so I went out and I contacted their support, put in my comments, and hopefully I'll get some response, or at least have put some more thought into as they're developing these apps or making updates, that they are making so that everybody can use their application.
And you're not sharing it. The one big thing too is once you find a good app that's really good, you share it. And so David, even kind of in your space where you had a bad experience here, but you couldn't navigate it, but then you went to another one, you're more likely to share that one and really drive the usage of that. And so I think referrals are big. I mean, especially in this digital age, we're always sharing cool websites or cool applications. We're always kind of posting those experiences. So I think that, David, to your point, we share things that have great experiences, and we live in a world that is not just a digital experience, but it's also a physical experience. So yeah, I think it's a huge miss, and definitely an area where just being aware and really taking that time to understand could help a lot of these businesses with their digital products.
And I've been as a tester on websites that are inaccessible, but then they also have a really bad feedback form or a really bad chat bot. And I think it was the dev Alex Tate said on Twitter, like, just because you're not good at measuring it doesn't mean you're not losing business due to access barriers. Like, are these people really going, if the site's really bad, are they actually, are you going to rely on customer complaints if they can't even get through your customer service process to leave a complaint to begin with? Like, why is it their job to give you feedback on why they left your website?
Yeah, exactly, right. If you have to go 3 different pages just to get to the contact form, and they keep, pushing you further away from the things that they're really should be focused on is that customer experience, and giving that either positive or negative feedback to make those changes. So, talking about an app and one that might not be, when you're working with a client, Brandon, maybe, how do you test for accessibility either on a site or on a mobile app? What are some of the things that you guys do? I know Russ mentioned you tabbing just around the screen and following the cursor, but can we talk a little bit maybe more in depth about that process?
Well, I'll kick it off. So whenever I get engaged, I immediately toss it over to Dan and Russ. So a lot of things that we do in from the initial conversations, it's really bringing in those experts. And so just like in any sales motion, I'll kick it over to Russ and Dan to expand on.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like as the test person, so I'm usually doing a lot of that. I am going to Rus for kind of usability, tiebreaker things all the time. But our kind of standard testing process would be kind of run an automated tool because it'll save us time. Potentially, it might find issues that we'll find later anyways. So might as well call them out early. And then, tab through. We test the site at low vision. So a 200% zoom site, a 400% zoom site are both kind of required to be accessible. And then we tab through in Safari, Firefox, Chrome. And then, we get onto screen readers. So we're testing, VoiceOver, NVDA, JAWS. These are the software applications for people who aren't familiar that kind of read websites or mobile apps out to a user who can't see them or has low vision, cognitive reasons for needing that kind of assistance or wanting that kind of assistance. So we kind of go through and our goal is always to kind of try to simulate the user base in the same as, from an accessibility side, we're simulating them. But, just from a QA side, we're always looking to like, okay, what do the users of this mobile app or website look like? So if I'm testing a site outside of accessibility, I would test, Chrome, Firefox, Safari. If I'm testing a site for accessibility, why not do the same thing? Like those users are using the same browsers. We know from surveys what the popular screen readers are, so we can target them, just like you'd say, we should test this on Mac and Windows or Android and iOS. So we can kind of give that same coverage. And then, if I have a question, I'll go over to Russ. I think a famous example, Russ, that we come back to is we had our jobs page at Nerdery. We allow dogs in the office, and we didn't have any alt text on that image mentioning the dog. There was, in fact, nowhere on the website that you would find out that you could have dogs in the office if you couldn't actually see that you can have dogs in the office. So like that was completely invisible to some people. And I think it was Russ who pointed out, like, there's actually like useful information in this image that we need to capture. Russ, what else I know we do a lot of design reviews together, and we just talked through kind of some design review stuff yesterday.
I love it. I love that you called us out, by the way. That was good. Good job.
Hey, we fixed it. Every company has like issues they know that they need to fix on their website. And, we have a backlog like everyone else, and like every consultancy, our clients come first, but we are getting through our own website bugs as well. So
love it.
Yeah. So Dan mentioned like those conversations where he's testing things and he's coming to me to talk about them. And frankly, like Dan doesn't need me to explain any of the WCAG accessibility guidelines to him, right? He knows those backwards and forwards. But that's what I love about the way that we do accessibility at Nerdery is that, yes, at the end of the day, like we are trying to help our clients get to a legal compliance in addition to serving a bigger audience. But we also really care about that usability. And so when Dan's coming to me, he's bringing me to be, is this making the experience significantly worse, for someone who's using a screen reader or they're using their keyboard to navigate or things like that? And how can we do that better on the design team, right? How can we bake a better way to do it into our design process, and then kind of throughout the process from design through dev through to QA.
And that's too where Brandon is talking to, his many friends down in Arizona there about like on the usability side, like I know the compliance stuff, but we've got questions about, there's a million ways to build the top navigation on a website. Like, should it open automatically when you hover over it? Should you have to press something to open each category? How many links should actually be in there? I think we've all seen those sites with or been on those sites with like huge mega menus of like, here's 60 elements under this top nav thing. Here's 70 under this top nav thing. So kind of getting that feedback from users, because I definitely use Rus as a poor substitute for that. But at the end of the day, we do have to marry this kind of accessibility compliance side to the usability side of like, you can make a site that, checks all the boxes, but is a crummy experience for a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. David, it's the same thing where we ask for help and we look at building technology for all. So it's really getting everyone's feedback. And so I've been very fortunate here in Arizona to have a lot of relationships with different organizations and really utilizing those relationships to say, help us be better, help us build stuff better, and soliciting that feedback. And, that's one of the things where we talked about is, we can build things, but it really needs to be a collaboration and get information from all different sources on who is using this. So David, I know you've been very instrumental in helping us be better at what we do. So we appreciate your help on that one.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I agree that if you build it for all, that ultimately it helps all the groups, right? Assistive technology is developed for a niche market, let's just say. But if you're building a site to make sure that accessibility and meets that group, but you're making the experience, enhancing the experience for everybody else, then I think that's where the win-win situation comes in, right? Putting assistive technology in a device, when it comes standard in your operating system versus bringing in a third-party application is reducing the cost to the consumer. I don't have to go out and buy another piece of technology. I can, open a box and get started using something right away. I can navigate and do the things that I need to do.
And just to reiterate, we're talking about kind of all the things to consider here and steps and things in people's head, but this isn't an onerous process or like a huge extra cost. Like this is something that can mostly exist in people's heads with the right training, is kind of starting out the right way when you're building an app or a website. Like, it doesn't have to be, I have a huge checklist, but I'm in QA. I'm always going to have a huge checklist.
Hey, Dan, you might want to share what QA is. I don't know if everyone.
Sorry. Quality assurance. So it's a discipline that exists across lots of different industries. Like, there's video game quality assurance testers, which a lot of our nerds are former video game testers. But there's also, people like me who specialize in websites, or I used to specialize in print quality assurance, like, is your business card the right stock? Is this gold foil coming out? That kind of fun stuff. But we basically coordinate with the devs and UX, BAs, PMs, everyone building the product and the requirements for the product. And we're the people who kind of simulate the consumer of the end consumer of that product and make sure they're not going to have issues. But also, it's our job to kind of call out those issues I mentioned before, that like, you're not necessarily going to get a customer complaint about like the first year, but it's still broken. Like, or, no one's going to complain that your logo is fuzzy because no one cares except you and us. Like, you pay us to care. So we'll tell you. It's our job to kind of check over things. And that's where we come at accessibility at Nerdery from that quality assurance perspective. And we try to tie it up to usability. Like, there's companies that just do the usability testing, and that's extremely valuable. But from my perspective, like, marrying those two together and having my team going on every single unique page or template on your site and checking one I think it's right now, it's 175 things on every one of those pages before you pass it off to someone who's going to simulate it on their own personal machine, whatever their own personal settings are. You're really cutting down a lot of that feedback, and we're always trying to solve things, further up, like earlier up the line, and we are kind of the last step before it gets to the consumer of the product, basically.
Right. Yeah. I kind of think of it as like, do you want one person testing on several devices to experiencing that problem, or do you want 20% of your customers to experience that problem? And that's where quality assurance comes in.
Yeah, and there are some sites, and that are just big enough that they don't think they need QA, and they just wait for the issues to come in. That's just not the perspective we have at Nerdery. Like we want to give our clients a product that they're proud of, and that works without kind of that lengthy, drawn out maintenance phase. Because by the time anyone puts out, if you've ever built a website or a product or worked on any kind of project, by the time you're done with it, you push it out the door, you don't want to spend the next 3 months doing edits and going back and doing changes. Like, you want to work on the next thing. So, and then that's where Brandon comes in to talk to you people about the next thing.
Excellent. Great conversation, guys. And when we talk about that, and you were talking about having different testers evaluate a site and do that QA, because one person, blindness is not a one size fit all, right? How I interact with my technology and my sites and applications and things are different than others, whether it's just pure screen reading, and then how quickly you utilize the tools that are built into that technology to quickly navigate Braille users, to screen magnification, or a combination of all, and color schemes, color blindness, whatever the multitude of opportunities or experiences that when you're doing your analysis on your site, is it accessible? It can't just be, a screen reader can use it, or screen magnification is fine, and you're not engaging or allowing that person who's using a screen reader to engage with your site.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. I appreciate that great approach to taking that. In terms of how I should say it this way, the difference between, you mentioned usability and accessibility. Can we dig a little bit further into that, and maybe Dan and Rus talk a little bit about the difference and what you're looking for from your perspective?
Sure. And before Rus yells at me, I should say that some people in UX will just say accessibility is usability. And I've certainly heard that before in the industry, and with all the Americans with Disabilities Act. When I'm talking about accessibility, I'm talking about generally kind of the legal compliance with guidelines, making sure that things are usable. Whereas Rus is going that extra step, and we're taking cues from him and baking those into our test plan as well. Like, if something's a bad experience, we'll start testing for it. But there is kind of that. This is why, as a crunchy QA person, I always get frustrated having UX conversations, because you guys are about how things feel sometimes, and is this easier or harder? And I might be more wrong or right. But Rus, on the usability side, what do you talk about there?
Yeah, I like to think of it as kind of three layers, right? At the base layer, you have functional, right? Like, can I technically get done what I need to get done? And that's where a lot of the accessibility guidelines play in that space. Although some of them are definitely, especially when you get up to the WCAG AAA guidelines, a lot of those are sort of quality of life improvements. But then the next layer is usable, right? Like, can I get things that I want to get done efficiently? Can I, am I going to be frustrated while I'm doing them? Like, those sorts of things are what we're thinking about in usability. So that example Dan gave earlier of the Twitter feed that was embedded in the middle of a page that required a keyboard user to press tab a couple hundred times just to get past it. That technically passes the guidelines, as far as I know.
Yes.
But that's a really bad experience in terms of usability, because if I'm using a mouse to navigate the site, I scroll right past that and I'm done, right? If I don't want to look at the Twitter feed, I scroll past and I'm done. And
I
then,
don't. Yeah, I was going to say just quickly to correct here. I don't want to talk down like the web content accessibility guidelines.
for sure.
They've done an extremely good job about not just covering functional, but also covering things that make things more difficult for users. And
Yeah.
on my side, that's how we're prioritizing things. Is like, can I do it, or is it just confusing, or is it like breaking the guideline, but there's no real user impact here that we can tell. So there is a wide swath of those guidelines, but Rus is going that kind of extra mile, like outside of those guidelines. To another thing that we talked about, Rus, is disabled buttons, where there's nothing in those guidelines about disabled buttons, but you ask users of a website, would you rather have this button on the bottom of this form not be usable until you've done everything correctly? Or would you rather just get an error telling you what you're doing wrong and submit the form? Every time we ask users, they're like, just give me the error. Like, I don't want to like play games with this form to determine if the button's going to appear. So,
right.
But yeah, so that's kind of the space Rus is playing with, like, and we are definitely on the compliance side. There's lots of things about confusion in there as well, but usability is going even further than that. So sorry, continue, Rus. I didn't tell the WCAG guidelines short.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. And then just the final layer that we think about is like, so functional, usable, and then useful, right? Is it like layering on top of that. And some people will add like transcendence or some very esoteric ideas as like a fourth layer, right? Does this like totally change your life? And that's above my pay grade, I think. But yeah, so thinking about it in terms of those three layers, and usually for accessibility, we're thinking about it at the first two, with the idea being that third layer of usefulness, at least if we have our way, if it's not useful, we're not going to build it in the first place, right? If it doesn't serve a real need that users have, why would we build it in the first place? But yeah, I think those first two, that like functional and usable, and especially that usable layer, is what Dan and I are often having these conversations about.
Yeah, we just had a usefulness conversation the other day about like loading icons and saving notifications, which I'm sure Davis had to deal with sometimes. Of like, do you really want the site to shout at you that it's loading every time that it's doing something? Like, is that useful to you or not? From my perspective, well, it has to. If it's telling it to the sighted users, the blind users, it needs to tell them that information as well, according to the guidelines. But then kind of rolling back and thinking like, well, when is this useful to have at all? Because it seems like it's really annoying for some people. So
how exciting would it be to see that conversation? Rus went after Dan and there's a conversation.
Every day.
Well, I'm glad that you guys are able to put those aside and join me here today. It's been a great conversation. I know we're getting close to the end of our time here today. There's lots more I'm sure we can talk about and continue the conversation at another time. But I'd love to be able to give our members how can they contact you three here today?
Yeah, absolutely. I encourage everyone to visit nerdery.com. You'll be able to get some history about Nerdery and some of the work that we've done. There is a general info at Nerdery that's on the contact page for Nerdery, but just get in there and check it out. I know there's a ton of nerds out there just like us, so come check us out. And then, being inclined to reach out to us if you're a company or you're just someone starting up and you have questions about accessibility. We're always open to answer any questions. So visit our website at nerdery.com.
Excellent. Very good. And Brandon, do you want to share your contact here on the local market?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're in sunny Phoenix, Arizona, where my colleagues are not, they're in Minnesota, my contact information is Brandon, BRANDON.Ramsey, RAMSEY @nerdery.com. So yeah, shoot me a message and let's connect here in the Phoenix area.
Great. Thank you. Dan, Rus, would you like to share your contact as well in case someone has questions or wants to continue the conversation about digital accessibility?
Your personal cell phone, your
if you're
bank account number, whatever you want to share.
Yeah.
If you're interested in talking to the Nerdery, I would encourage you to reach out to Brandon or our just contact form on the website. If you want to watch me get in arguments about underlining links with accessibility professionals, I'm Dan Holbrook QA on Twitter. But other than that, I think the main way to reach me is going to be through the Nerdery.
And Dan, we also have resources too that you've published on accessibility and all that. Can you share that?
Sure. Yeah. If you go to our blog in the insights section, you'll find our articles on building with accessibility in mind from day one, the power and limits of automated accessibility testing, and coming very soon, kind of a roundup of our 2021 accessibility work at the Nerdery, the biggest issues, things like that, either in the form of tweets on our social media or in a blog post, depending on how chunky it is. But like we've always kind of got some accessibility content going there.
Yeah, I would add to that, if if you're a content creator or a web admin or someone in a role like that, maybe a web writer, those types of roles. We do also have a guide for creating and maintaining content accessibly on the site, since that's our, when we finish something, we hand it off to our clients, and they're usually the ones maintaining it. So that guide is there for them and for you, if that's something you do.
That's an excellent guide written by Rus, and it basically covers probably half an hour of the training we give to companies on accessibility. Just wholesale, really good advice for anyone managing content for accessibility.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And thank you, the three of you, again, for your knowledge, your expertise, for sharing and helping me and my audience better understand digital accessibility, the importance of it, right? Every day we're using it in our businesses, to either on our internal customers, supporting our employees, making sure that they can access the software applications or systems that they need to do their job, or to our customers, external customers, the consumer, et cetera, that are engaging with us to build a better experience. So I want to thank you guys all for doing that and helping contribute to my first episode.
Absolutely. This was awesome. Thanks, David.
Yeah, no, thank you
Thanks
guys.
for having us.
Thank you, guys. I am David Steinmetz, your host of Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time. And I can be contacted at dsteinmetz@azifb.com, or you can find more information through our website at www.azifb.com. And thank you again.
Thank you for listening to Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time with your host, David Steinmetz. Be sure to subscribe to Changing the Perception of Blindness, one conversation at a time on your favorite podcast platform, and tune in live on Phoenix Business RadioX every third Friday at 1 p.m. We hope you feel inspired by today's conversation, and maybe we've even sparked a new idea or opportunity.